Hey, it's Zach from What the Pod Was That and the All About Nothing podcast. And America's birthday is coming up faster than we can track. Celebrate Independence Day in style with ZJZ Design's latest t-shirt collection on TeePublic. Introducing 3 brand new 4th of July heart designs that perfectly capture the spirit of America. These shirts feature vibrant, patriotic colors and unique heart-shaped designs that stand out at any celebration. Whether you're heading to a fireworks show, a barbecue, or just enjoying the summer sun, our 4th of July heart collection has something for everyone. Show off your love for the red, white, and blue with ZJZ Design. Visit ZJZ Design's TeePublic shop today and get ready to shine this Independence Day. Links in the show notes or visit ZJZDesigns.com and check out all the great designs. New designs come up often. ZJZDesigns.com.
This episode of the All About Nothing podcast is sponsored by Everplay Sports and Social Summer 2026 Adult Sports Leagues. Registering now through May 20th for kickball, softball, volleyball, pickleball, bowling, and more. Visit everplaysocial.com for details and registration. Do it now because these leagues will sell out. It's a great way to get off the couch and hang out with friends while doing enjoyable, fun activities. Again, visit everplaysocial.com and sign up today.
The All About Nothing podcast may have language and content
that isn't appropriate for some.
Listener discretion is advised.
All right, welcome back, Nothingers, to the All About Nothing podcast. I am Barrett Gruber, host of the All About Nothing podcast. You can find me across all of social media at Barrett Gruber. Please subscribe and share the show. That's how we get new listeners. Also, please consider supporting the show financially by visiting theallaboutnothing.com and becoming an official member and proudly calling yourself a true Nothinger. We'll have more details on that at the end of the show. If you can't do that, please give us a 5-star review, a like, and follow us across all social media. You can find links at theallaboutnothing.com. So this is going to be part 2 of my interview with Denny LaVé, Republican candidate for Senate in Idaho. And just want to reiterate, had a really good time speaking with him. I think that we both recognize that we come from opposite ends of, or we come from different parties. I tend to lean more progressive and liberal, where Denny is a faith-based conservative who is obviously recognizing his Christian faith as not necessarily something that comes out of judgment, with some Republicans and even some Democrats do. But he really does seem to have a good foundation of what it is that the people of Idaho need in a representative. And I do, at the end of the episode, wish him luck and everything. But thanks for coming back and listening to this episode. This is going to be part 2 of episode number 306. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right back into the episode where we left off. Well, I don't want to get done with this show, and you're probably pressed for time, but I do want to ask, in Idaho.
To be totally fair, we can keep going.
Okay, perfect.
You want to go another hour? We got the time.
Perfect. Well, let me ask you then, running for Senate in Idaho, what are some of the things in Idaho that are the most pressing to the voters that you're outside of your policies and things like that? When you talk to them, what is it that they're telling you are the things that they want to see fixed?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was the key thing that I did on my book tour, right? So I wrote my book. You talked about it. I actually went county by county, stopping at county seat, talking to elected officials, talking with their staff. And the one thing I asked them is, if you could fix one thing in the country, what would it be? Right. Well, we just had a lengthy talk about number 2. Right. Number 2 was healthcare, right? Because healthcare is crushing our federal budget and dragging down the federal, debt, or ballooning the federal debt, as the case may be. But it's also crushing everyday Americans, everyday Idahoans, right? The number one thing from a federal level that they were upset about was, they're really tired of toxic rhetoric and nothing getting done. This hyper partisanship, where it's all about the party power and maintaining party power. And they're so fed up with that. They're so fed up with it, and they want to see stuff get done. They want
you strike me as the type of person that would be willing to sit down in a committee and discuss whatever a bill or debate across the board or across the line on how the bill would potentially best benefit. When you look at some of the representation for Idaho or Montana or things like, like states that are in that grouping that have sort of the same issues federally, that the federal government should be taking responsibility for, what are outside of healthcare? Obviously, one of the biggest things, and you talk about in your policies, and is specifically rural healthcare. And one of the things that you talk about is this idea of having rural healthcare clinics. That I have also sort of even here I live between Columbia and Lexington, South Carolina. It's not rural; it is urban or suburban. But I have expressed this idea that next to every single public library, why can't there be a public clinic that if someone has a fever or if someone has a laceration or something like that they could go into and be treated for and pay a minimal, probably a subsidized fee to be treated for something that doesn't necessarily have to go to an emergency room, or something that doesn't necessarily have to be scheduled with a doctor, so a doctor's appointment and that sort of thing. But it could fall outside of the realm of the insurance that could be afforded based on either grants to the states or something like that. But every single public library, just to have that public clinic to treat people, and because a lot of the time, people I know that I work with that make very good salaries, I assume, have a fear of going to the doctor for what the cost is going to be, just for, they sprained their wrist because a branch fell on them while they were doing yard work. So now they're afraid to go to the doctor because of how much it's potentially going to cost them. So that injury doesn't get fixed. It doesn't get treated in a way that it won't be a progressive issue later on.
Yeah, well, now compound that by, what if your nearest hospital is 2 hours away? 3 hours away, right? Like that's my state, right? Like I told you yesterday, I started the morning in Pocatello, Idaho.
Yeah.
Pocatello is not a large city, right? It is not a large city by any stretch of the imagination. Like you could fit everybody in Pocatello probably in one block of New York City, right? They wouldn't like that, by the way. But by comparison,
you're compressing their bubbles.
But when we left there, we drove to St. Anthony, which is about an hour and a half, I think, away, northeast, right? Pocatello is probably the closest major hospital. And it's not like a trauma center. It's kind of like what you'd think of as a small community hospital, right? And then, we went further out to a town called Ashton, right? Which is a farm community where, you hear about famous Idaho potatoes, right? Like there's a lot of potato farming in that region. Like you're talking, you could be 2.5, 3 hours from a basic community hospital. And if you, like, people in our rural areas, they buy life flight insurance.
Wow.
Right? Because they recognize that if they have a life-threatening emergency and they don't get life flighted to a real trauma center somewhere, that they're going to die. It's not simple, right? And so some families have it and some families don't. And like that's the level when we talk rural healthcare and needing to address rural healthcare, but then you go to like even Boise, our biggest city. Boise has like 500,000 people, roughly speaking, in the Boise metro area. If they have acute trauma, like intense acute trauma, some of those patients, they actually have to send down to, University of Utah Medical Center, or they have to send them to Oregon State University's Medical Center, right? Because again, the community, it hasn't developed out into a large enough community to have these major acute trauma centers. I'm sure things have evolved and changed, but I recall when my twins, my wife and I had twins to start, not on purpose, by the way. It was, God saying, I love you twice as much as most parents.
I have twins, so yeah,
I remember
get it.
That. So we had our twins. They came a little early. They were in the the neonatal intensive care at our local hospital in Coeur d'Alene. Somebody thought, well, we think we see something wrong with one of their hearts, but we're not sure. But, we're going to send them over. We want to send them over to Spokane, which is 35 miles away, to a major hospital that had the technology to actually see if there was something wrong. And thank God there wasn't. But, that resulted in a life flight and sending them over there. And they spent 2 weeks over there in the NICU. And again, when I talk rural healthcare, like I'd like to see, more support for getting better rural facilities, whether it's community centers next to libraries. And again, I have to be cognizant that not all of the towns in our communities have libraries.
Sure.
Right? Or if they do, it's one small room inside their city facility. Right? Like, I think it's very easy when you live in a densely populated or somewhat densely populated area to not have an understanding of the problems that a lot of Western states face, right? To get from Bonners Ferry, Idaho, which is the northernmost county capital, up in Boundary County, which is right up by the Canadian border, down to Paris, Idaho, which is in the southeast corner of our state, is a 12-hour drive.
Good night.
That
is unbelievable.
Go from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is kind of the population center of North Idaho in the Panhandle, down to Boise, is about a 6.5, 7-hour drive.
I can traverse the state of South Carolina in about 3.5, 4 hours.
Mm-hmm. And
from one side to the other.
What's the population of South Carolina, roughly?
I want to say I think we're somewhere in the 2.5 to 3 million.
Yeah, I would guess it's probably higher.
It might be higher.
Right?
It might be higher.
Based
I don't know.
Just based on how many representatives you have in Congress,
So 7. We have 7 congressmen or 7 representatives.
You're probably
5 million,
6 million, 7 million.
Yeah.
Right? Because we have 2 million, and we're on the cusp of finally getting a third.
Yeah. Okay. So you're right. Yeah. I know I'm going to catch grief for that, for not knowing what the population of South Carolina is.
But here's another frame of reference, right? Idaho is incredibly mountainous, which is one of the reasons why it takes so long to drive anywhere. Because you either have to drive through the mountains, which is a slow proposition, or you have to drive around the mountains, which is also just takes time, right? Well, if you were to steamroll Idaho, and please don't, because we love our mountains, but if you were to steamroll it, I've been told it's actually bigger than Texas, right?
Wow.
Well, Texas has 2% federal and state land in Texas, 2% of its surface area. Idaho is 65% federally owned and 20% state owned. And that presents some radical differences compared to state, where it's almost entirely privately owned.
Yeah.
That creates some real issues. They have programs that help with that, right? Like, for example, there's a program called Payment in Lieu of Taxes, or the PILT program. What that is supposed to do is it's supposed to send money back to states where the federal government, at the time of their inception of statehood, reserved vast amounts of land for their own, for the national use. To replace those lost property taxes, the federal government agrees to send money to the states to cover the goods and services, right? Because, for example, Idaho County, kind of in the bottom of the Panhandle, is the largest county in Idaho. It's about, I want to say, 8,300 or 8,400 square miles in this county. They don't, the couple thousand people that live in that county, there's not enough property taxes to cover all of the EMS services for all the people who come and use federal lands and state lands for all of their recreation. They can't afford to provide EMS services to all of those folks.
Yeah.
So that comes from these payment in lieu of taxes, right? We have counties we have a county, Custer County, is a fairly large county. It is 97% federally owned.
And I'm not gonna say that that's not, having land that's federally owned, I think allows for the state to maintain some beauty. You look at Texas, and while I think parts of Texas are beautiful, I also recognize that there are parts of Texas where while I don't have an issue with the oil industry, you look out across the field and you just see you see 600 or 700 wells that aren't even moving. But it's an eyesore that But then you look at other states like Wyoming and Montana, and I guess potentially Idaho, where there's a vast population of wildlife that can't exist other places because there isn't the land for them to exist on.
I think there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense, for the federal government to retain some land, right? Like, where was it? I just read this today, so I'm not recalling the state, but I think they just, geologists just found a lithium deposit in one of the states that.
I saw that too.
Did you see that? Right?
Yeah.
And we know that here in Idaho, like we actually have reserves on federal land of a whole bunch of these critical rare earth minerals. Like that's a great thing for our country to have, and for us, if we're going to develop, to develop very responsibly. We've got here in North Idaho, we've got one of possibly the biggest Superfund site in the country. As a result, it's up in the Silver Valley, and it's largely the result of mining done to support World War II, but was done, in such a way that the mining companies were told, "Hey, we need the minerals. We don't care what it takes. Get us the minerals because we need to fight the war." And that resulted in, this kind of horrendous ecological disaster, right? That like almost killed everything in the valley, running down into Lake Coeur d'Alene, which is one of the treasures of the area. And they've done a good job of working to turn it around, but it's cost billions upon billions upon billions of dollars to do that. And even now, like they put recommendations out saying, hey, if you're a childbearing age woman, don't eat the fish from this river and that river and from the lake. And if you're not, maybe once a month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's a potential risk of people saying, hey, we need to exploit these resources, whatever the cost.
Right. Look to some of the states like West Virginia. West Virginia literally has mountains being sheared off to mine for coal. Like it's absolutely one of the most beautiful states in the country, except that the people of West Virginia are being poisoned constantly because of the deregulation of these coal companies and allowing for the coal sludge to run into creeks that people in haulers literally use as their source of water. They don't have the privilege of putting a pipe into the ground to get water out of the ground. They have a pipe in the creek that runs next to their property, and that's what feeds water into their house. How is Idaho going to be protected from becoming a West Virginia? And again, nothing wrong. I love West Virginia. It's the abuse that West Virginia takes from
that's
corporations.
And that's where, so again, we're both Catholics here. Have you ever read the document Rerum Novarum?
No, I haven't.
I would highly recommend reading that. It's by Pope Leo the 13th. And it was written in, I want to say 1893.
Okay.
Right. And while that sounds like wow, how could this, thing that's 150 years old, how could it be worth reading? Right. 130 years old. If you go back in the time machine and go, okay, what was going on? Well, you had Marx and Engels pushing communism and socialism. And you also had kind of like the height of the Industrial Revolution going on. Right. You're 100 years post-revolution France, post-revolution America. And I think he does a very interesting job of kind of going, here's what we see in this system, and here's what we see in this system, and they both have issues that are unacceptable. And here's a higher and better place that we could get to, right? For example, when we look at the role of employer and employee, right? I really honestly believe it's incumbent on employers, to pay living wages. I understand that there's economic pressures and companies have to make money. I do get that. But to the extent possible, I think it's important that everybody, look and go, it's important that we're taking care of our employees. Like, and that brings up that kind of stakeholder conversation, right? By law, like stakeholder is a legal definition.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's the people that own the shares of the company. Period. Have a nice day.
Yeah.
And corporate
Well,
management has a responsibility to maximize return for the stakeholders.
as an example to that, the Waltons, who own Walmart, 80%, I think I saw a statistic that said 80 or 83% of the people that are employed by Walmart, their lives are being subsidized by the state or federal government through Medicaid and things like that. But you have and I shop at Walmart. It's not one of those things that I will deny myself of because of the convenience. But you have a company who many of their employees are not being paid a living wage that that forces them to have a second job. So I look at an 8-hour job. I look at an 8-hour day, and you probably have more hours being the owner of a company, but I look at an 8-hour day and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad this day is over. But the thought of having to go and then potentially do another 4 hours or another 6 hours at another job just to try and maintain a lifestyle that provides for my family, I don't want to even think about that. But there are people that do it, and a company they work for is Walmart that will probably report for this quarter $5 billion in profit.
Mm-hmm. And I look at that and I go, again, by law, that's what they have to do. But why does the law, deny the community that Walmart's in a stakeholder position?
Yeah.
Why are the employees not stakeholders? Like it matters that Walmart's there for them, right? Like they have a stake in its success. So, I mean, like that's a view of, if Walmart had to pay them twice what they're paying now, and it meant that Walmart never made any money, and in fact lost money and had to shutter stores, well, that wouldn't be good for them either, right?
Right. Totally agree.
But it's an interesting conversation to have because, yeah, we want companies to make profits, but we also want and need a good, healthy working class and middle class. Like that's an important part of society.
The people in Idaho, the people that you're looking to represent, when you talk to them about these issues, what is generally their perception of it? What is it? I assume there are Walmarts in Idaho, but it's, I like, even in South Carolina, you can throw a rock and not hit a Walmart, but you go to places like Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, there's a Walmart at every exit. In Idaho, how are the people of Idaho reacting to the growth that Idaho is experiencing?
They're frustrated, right? I mean, the cost of housing has tripled in the last 6 to 8 years. In some places quadrupled or even quintupled, right? Idaho has this reputation of being this very conservative, very great place to live, and it is. During COVID, we had a lot of political refugees, and I think South Carolina's experienced something very similar, right? Like the stats between fastest growing per capita have bounced back and forth for the last few years between South Carolina and Idaho.
Yeah,
right? And that influx of cash by borrowing from the federal government kind of put in motion a cycle of, okay, there was all this extra cash in the marketplace that led to people selling houses in, politically unfavorable areas for them and deciding to move to places that align a little bit more politically with them. But that also drove up the price of housing in those communities. And, there's a lot of young people here in Idaho that are frustrated because they don't see a path to home ownership anytime in the near future. Right. I mean, when I was talking to a guy from the Idaho Home Builders Association, and he's like, yeah, well, we're trying to build more starter homes, and, but regulations is, the single biggest factor in the cost of a starter home. And I'm like, well, give me an example. He's like, well, $1 million home, it's going to be, $250,000 between state and federal regulations and fees. And I'm like, okay, hold on a second. $1 million is not a starter home. And he's like, okay, well, $500,000, it's like 120. And I'm like, you're not getting it.
No.
That is not a starter home.
I'm sure it was the same for your grandparents, but my grandparents bought a home in West Palm Beach in the 50s that was heavily subsidized by the federal government for the building costs. But they bought a home in West Palm Beach in the 50s for like $35,000. When when it became necessary for them, they couldn't live on their own anymore. They sold that $35,000 home for like $1.5 million. So,
yeah, it is a bit of a conundrum, and I thought I would find pockets where that hadn't been the case. Like, as I got more into rural areas, I thought I would find pockets where they weren't, like, that wasn't an issue their kids were running into. I was very hopeful of that. And the fact is that no, even in some of the, you get to Soda Springs, Idaho, right? I mean, and it doesn't get much more rural and remote than Soda Springs. And God bless those folks. They're great folks. Housing prices have tripled in the last 5 years. Like, a $20 an hour ag worker can't afford a $600,000 house, right? And to a certain extent, yeah, cost of regulations and cost of, like, if have you ever been in a starter home from the 50s, like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. It's not it would not fit my family.
Wouldn't fit your family, but it is a charming little starter home, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Nobody makes those today. Very, very few of those are made today.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And to be fair, I think, part of that is regulatory burden, right? Like, it is,
well, bedroom's got to have a window and a closet. If you're going to have bathrooms built now, they have to have specific safety regulations attached to them in order to make sure that, there isn't sewage smell, or gases leaking up into the house that would potentially harm somebody. Like, I recognize those as being necessary to prevent you from having a working class, population that's capable of paying to live in the home that they've purchased. But I also recognize that, in California, the regulations in California are so extreme. I have friends that have lived in the same house now, outside of Pasadena. He is the director principal for a Catholic school. His wife is an administrator for the Catholic school. He almost became a priest too, till he met my friend who he then eventually got married to. Like, he was within days of taking his oath, and shipping, going off to wherever he was going to complete his practice to become a priest, and met her and said, I'm out. That was it. So, and they have 3 beautiful children, and but they've been trying to get solar panels on their house for the last 4.5 years. And because of the regulations, because of everything necessary in order for the state and the local government to approve of that, they still cannot. They literally have solar panels sitting in their garage that are already purchased, that are now out of like, the technology of those solar panels is outdated. Like, in order for them to get new solar panels, they'd have to sell off the old ones to get new ones. So, there is definitely issues when it comes to how regulated locales are in this country.
100%. There's just so much going on right now. And then you layer on, an issue that's important to folks here. Folks in Idaho really kind of, even at a national level, they tend to say, hey, We don't want to be in foreign wars. We don't want to be meddling in foreign affairs. We don't want the government spying on us. Like, those are all things that are happening, and have been happening for a long time, right? Like, since World War II. I mean, how many nation building campaigns have we been on? How many of those have been successful? We're not very good at it, but we keep trying our hand at it.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's a really challenging situation if I'm being, frank and brutally honest about it. But I look at, how many South American and Central American situations has America meddled in, right?
and made worse.
And made worse. And then, folks want to come here for a better life. Granted, I very much believe, look, you got to follow the law. I do believe that. And at the same time, I think, if we're having an honest conversation about it, like we do have responsibility in some of the train wreck economic and criminal situations that are there, where we've upset economies, we've upset governments, and have allowed some of these bad things to happen, right? And it's not a new thing. I mean, heck, as Catholics, we can look at the Cristeros Revolution in Spain, right?
Yeah,
and we can
absolutely.
go, the revolution, the Mexican Revolution that we just celebrated on May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, right? That new government turned around and started persecuting the Catholic Church and shutting down Catholic churches. And then you have Catholics that take up arms to say, no, we have the right to practice our faith, and this is our faith. And, you have America supporting, the Mexican government that was a revolution to put down, these Catholic counter-revolutionaries, right?
Right.
Taking a side. And it's just very interesting to see how active we are on the world stage of meddling with things, right? The Foreign Relations Committee has diverted funds over to Somalia and to Somaliland to create and promote the civil unrest and civil war to destabilize that region, right? I mean, we got our fingers everywhere. We're upset when people put their fingers in America, right?
Yeah.
God forbid Russia or China interfere and try to weigh and manipulate. But if we're being honest, we're doing that all over the place.
Well, people forget that what eventually came of the 9/11 attacks was a group that we helped create in Afghanistan and Pakistan in order to fight the Russians. And then we turned our back on them, and they started not liking us for that sort of thing. So, it's not to say that we caused 9/11. That is absolutely not what I'm saying.
No, I'm not.
But no, I know. But somebody will clip it and tell me that's what I said. But it
yeah.
Yeah. But it is. I look at what our country could do to really help other nations in the world that ask for help. But that's the key point is it's the asking for help. I'm not saying that they have to get on their knees and grovel and say, whatever, but I think unless it's just an outright, warlord that is terrorizing a specific tribe of people, or if it's genocide, I think that we as a country have the technology and usually the financial ability to step in and stop something like that. But in situations where it's just, their government's not playing nice with our corporations, then why don't we step in and make it easier for our corporations to pull oil or natural resources out of their land, that sort of thing. That's where I have a problem with it. Ukraine is one of those places where Russia is literally attacking them to take over their land and has asked us for assistance. They've asked the world for help against what is Russia, but a country that we have claimed to be our enemy almost 100 years now. I mean, we're approaching 100 years of what was Soviet rule, and then, this pseudo democracy that they claimed to have. But Russia is continuing to attack a sovereign nation that we we helped to come up with a treaty where that nation would remove all of their nuclear weapons as long as they knew that we had their back. And I think through Biden, I think we pseudo had their back, and then with Trump, there's always this feeling like, well, who is he aligned and who is he aligning us with? He definitely claims that Russia is continuing to be our enemy, but he also speaks really friendly of Vladimir Putin from time to time.
Yeah,
and
I guess
it just gets confusing.
I think I would assert that from an interventionist perspective, like, we're not really in a financial position to go be.
No, I agree. Completely agree.
We're
Now,
hit
yeah,
$40 trillion in national debt.
Is insane.
It's insane. And that's just, if you go back, like, I know these numbers because of when my opponent was elected. If you go back to when he was elected 17 years ago, we were 11 trillion in debt. So the debt spiral has accelerated exponentially, and like, we got to take care of home, the commitments we've made at home, before we gallivant around the world playing, Don Quixote and taking on windmills in other countries.
Agreed.
Right? Because, like I said, we're just not really good at doing the regime change. We're not really, I think we struggle to hit a lot of the targets, like the actual strategic objectives. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but it's
hard. Honestly, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell because the reporting on one side is very glowing of what's going on, and the reporting on the other side is very not glowing. And as someone that tries to take in as much information as I possibly can, I couldn't tell you with assertion exactly what's going on from one day to the next. Yeah. And that's, I think, and I think that's one of those things that really also entrenches people into whatever side it is they're on.
100%.
It pushes people to vote for candidates that maybe don't necessarily represent their best interest, or like your opponent who has been in office for 17 years.
Well, that's just in the Senate, right? I mean, he won his first election in 1970, 6 years before I was born, right? He just turned 83 this past weekend. I mean, look, I granted, the guy might be in perfect health and perfectly sound mind and body, and at the other spectrum, like, maybe he's putting on a good show. Like, we all have relatives that have done that to us.
Strom Thurmond was our senator when I moved here to South Carolina. I lived in Georgia. I lived in Atlanta, and I moved here when Strom Thurmond was still our senator. Now, he wasn't our senator for much longer. He had his centennial birthday, and he passed away shortly after. But I can speak to the things that Strom Thurmond did well for the state of South Carolina. Federal contracts, corporations came to the South Carolina, and I get that they get tax benefits and things like that, but those tax benefits eventually expire, and those corporations stick around. Like, they stay in South Carolina, Boeing and BMW, and now Scout International, and there are companies that are here because of the incentives that they received, but they stuck around because of the workforce that they trained and the backbone that they built in order to support those. And Strom Thurmond, as the senator for South Carolina, was part of the reason that a lot of those, maybe not the BMWs but federal contracts came to South Carolina because Strom Thurmond was such an advocate for it. Did I agree with him on every policy and thing as he was as a Dixiecrat? No. But, at the same time, I saw how he benefited even into his later years. But I also saw just how much hand-holding had to be done in order to put up the facade of someone who was able to proceed in that position. 83 is not young.
No, it's not. And it's back when I first started in business, I studied some work by a guy named John Dudek from Stanford. And the concept that he labeled it as was called the web of entanglements theory. And what he said was the longer we're in a given field, the less likely we are to come up with innovation because our thinking is anchored in all of our past experiences.
Absolutely.
And when you have a politician that's been, 50 plus years in politics, we apply that theory. Like, what are the odds that they're going to come up with a breakthrough solution to an American problem? And especially when we can say this politician has had 17 years to do it. What makes us think, if they haven't done it yet, what makes us think that they're going to do it 6 more years into their 80s? Like that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's it's funny. I don't know what sort of political party dinners you go to and things like that, or if any, right?
They're blue. They're mostly blue in color.
We'll hold that against you, right? I like blue. You can tell by my wall, right? I mean,
they don't.
Blue is one of my favorite colors.
The blue ones don't hold it against me either. So,
there you go. When we go to our political dinners and whatnot, we have our congressman, like our current congressman is Russ Fulcher in District 1 in Idaho. He comes in and, he's got a 3x5 card with a few bullet points, and he talks about the legislative things he's working on and the legislative accomplishments and laws passed and where he got ideas from in the local community. It's pretty on point. Right now our Secretary of State is kind of making some waves around the nation for some of the cases he's taken to the Supreme Court. And he's had some other cases that he's won, like he's got a funny anecdote about where, he actually had a court case against the Church of Satan. Right.
Okay.
And so I won't spoil it, but it's a funny story. But he talked about the details of the case and how they won. When a politician gets up and just says, "Hey, Donald Trump's great, so you should vote for me," especially after 17 years in the job, you kind of got to scratch your head and go, "Well, what are you doing? Like, are you doing anything?" And especially when he has to read that speech, and he reads the whole speech out about Trump's doing great things and you should vote for me. I hope that people in Idaho are seeing this, and I hope that they're asking the question and going,
"What's your tie-in for that?" Like, okay, Donald Trump's doing great things. That is your opinion. That's great.
Right.
You've attached yourself to his coattails. That's fine. But what is it that you're doing, not you, but him, for the state of Idaho, for his district specifically? What is the relationship that you have with the executive branch that is benefiting your congressional district?
Yeah. And the few things that he points to are they're about in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, Idaho's 2 million people. It's like, I freed up this one thing that was holding up, the reconstruction of a veterans home, which again, this is a noble thing to do, right?
Sure, absolutely. The
veterans home is important. But so you made a phone call and okay, great. People, this was a big deal. Like, we have all this federal land. Well, something that sometimes happens is big developers from other states, other places decide, well, can we put a solar farm on that land, or can we put a wind farm on that land? And sometimes the federal government will say, yeah, you can. And the local community is like, not my backyard, right? I don't know if you have wind farms in your communities over there, but they definitely change the landscape. They definitely change the view, and it's not always. It's not pleasant, right? I mean, it's not a coal plant, but it's still.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with wind farms except for some of the offshore wind farms, but they're so far out you can't see them.
Yeah, well, here it's right in our communities, right, and neighboring our communities, and so there was a large wind farm that was federally permitted that was going to sell power to California from Idaho. Which, again, it's like, they got land, put it down there. Well, because they don't want it in their backyard. Because
interesting,
they're ugly. And
Interesting.
sometimes, believe it or not, they catch on fire, and then the fire rains down from the 150 feet in the air and catches stuff on fire down below, and can cause some catastrophic damage. Right? I mean, that
Yeah.
actually is a thing. It's very real.
Yeah, and I've looked into wind farms. Like I certainly would prefer that our country have less reliant on fossil fuels and more reliance on renewable resources like wind and hydroelectric. But I also am a proponent of nuclear power.
Mhm.
Our nuclear technology in creating energy from even down to the waste. Our technology has advanced so far from the 1980s that nuclear, purely based on what I've read and the papers in Popular Mechanics and other science magazines and publications, nuclear is so safe and nuclear is so efficient. Like it's insane to me that we haven't invested into. I would drive a nuclear powered car if it was available, like
and to his credit, like we here in Idaho, we have the Idaho National Lab, which is at the forefront of this nuclear research, right? And we are doing good work there. But he got an executive order, or there was an executive order. What his role in getting it is up for debate, right? But the executive order saying, no, we're actually, the community doesn't want this wind farm. We don't want it either. Signed DJT. But the issue is legislators make their impact long term through legislation.
Yeah.
Because anything that's done by executive order can be reversed,
tossed out
by executive order, right?
Yep.
And the reality is that as a country, we should want less executive orders, not more executive orders, right? We would want the executive to carry out the laws, not alter and pen them by executive fiat.
Yeah,
and
absolutely agree.
And to a large extent, like Congress has kind of passed the buck downstream to that on a lot of issues. They've created these agencies and then said, "Well, you make the rules and have a nice day." And we're seeing that come back the other way now, right? The reversal of the Chevron doctrine, basically saying actually courts can review the rules that these administrative agencies make to see if they're actually legal or not, and they're beneficial or not, right? We don't have to just trust the agency.
Well, and to that point, technology changes. Like to have a government oversee or have a government agency oversee something like nuclear energy at a in the 60s, 70s, and 80s absolutely sounds necessary, because I don't know that there was the technology or the knowledge of that technology enough to not have someone to oversee and say, hey, let's back off of this until we have enough information. But it's like space exploration. I do not believe that NASA is going to get us to Mars without private industry and having the backbone of the SpaceX or whatever.
Why, right?
To which part
of why NASA's not going to get us there, right?
Oh, I assume it's not
because they offshored all the slide rule manufacturing to China, and now they're not accurate enough.
Is that really it? Oh, wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't it be like, well, they came up with the mechanical ballpoint pen, and that was where it stopped.
Yeah. Somehow we lost the ability to manufacture the Fisher Space Pen, and we could no longer go to space.
Right. We were this close to the TI-87 calculator, but we had to stop at the 86. No, that's that. But I think it's absolutely necessary that we have corporations in this country that do well, but I also feel like we shouldn't allow for those corporations to just run amok and take advantage.
No. That's where I think, for me as a Catholic, like Rerum Novarum really provides kind of a guiding North Star to like an economic system that works for everybody.
I'm going to put that in the show notes. I'm going to put a link to the document in the show notes so that others can check that out as well.
I'm sure there's things that have changed in 130 years, but at the same time, it does. I mean, think about this, right? Something that's on a lot of people's minds is AI. And how are we going to deal with, 5 million people, 10 million people losing their jobs in the next 10 years over AI?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? If we had an overall belief in economic system that the communities that those AI companies are in are actually their stakeholders and workers are stakeholders in our community, we would be tackling this AI race the same way. Because right now we're tackling it in a way that a few select people are going to get a new Gulfstream and a new mega yacht, and 10 million people are going to lose their jobs. Like, that's the way that we're handling it now. And really, these types of questions are the ones that the Senate should be taking up. How do we deal with these things that are 10 years downstream and 20 years downstream instead of how do we fund ICE? Like, that should be a no-brainer. That shouldn't be one that we fight over, right? And I don't know how we got there to where, okay, we have a certain set of laws on the books, and some people say, yeah, we should enforce them, and some say we shouldn't, right? And some say, yeah, we should pay the people who enforce these, and some people say, no, we shouldn't, right? Like, to me, that's a bit crazy that we get bogged down in that sort of thing. And we see, each party throw the other party under the bus, essentially at the expense of the American people. And when we have questions like this AI question that really need to be addressed, I mean, do you guys have Waymo down there in South Carolina?
I have not seen Waymo in Columbia or Lexington. I think we still have drivers driving the cars, but I have seen videos where a vehicle powered by driven by a Waymo system drove right into a I guess a woman and her child, and I've seen, for some reason, people attacking the vehicles too. So nobody's helping anything with this situation, but I think that I would have a fair amount of discomfort sitting in a vehicle that didn't have a physical driver. How fast is the broadband connection to, or if it's just AI that's driving it, then why didn't it interpret a woman in a stroller as being something that it should avoid rather than a target? It's so I'm a little uncomfortable with AI driving my vehicle, but I think is it possible that we could move to a what was it, iRobot scenario where AI is driving all of the vehicles, and then you potentially have a system that is tracking every single object on a highway, and maybe that would be an improvement over one vehicle tracking itself and the other obstacles around it. And that's because that's all variables, and a system's got to take into account for the speed of this thing on the left and that thing on the right. And I just it's kind of like electric vehicles. I have an electric motorcycle that is fun to putz around on. It only gets about 70 miles per charge as long as I keep it under 40 miles an hour. But I haven't gotten to the point where I'm comfortable with the idea that if I want to drive from here to Atlanta in a Tesla, that I'm going to have to stop twice to get power charged. And there's the technology isn't there for me to be comfortable with it. I'd like to see it get there, but I'm going to drive my 2005 Honda Element until the day it dies, because I know how to work on it. I do all the maintenance on it, and I am not concerned that vehicle is ever going to have an issue as long as I'm the owner. So.
Well, and that actually brings up something that I think is important, right? Like, you can work on your car. That's one of the things I'm proudest of about my sons, right? I have 6 sons. All of the adult ones are incredibly capable mechanics, right? They've They've leveraged what we've had. They've leveraged YouTube.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where, like, my 18-year-old son, last fall bought a Duramax Chevy pickup from my company, an old one, like a 2013, right? And he's driving it, you know, okay, feels like something's off. He does the investigation, finds out it has a blown head gasket. Him and his buddies disassemble this motor in our barn, do all the work to replace the head gasket, put it back together. They're back on the road, right? Like those are the types of skills that I think it's going to be hard for AI to replace in the near future.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
And one of the things that I'm concerned about in education is when I went to school. Again, I'm a convert. I went to public school, but what was fascinating about the school I went to in Utah was they had a full art department. And when I say a full art department, I mean from fine art, oil painting to they had a foundry where you could do jewelry work. They had stained glass studio. They had, like whatever the visual art was, physical art. They had sculpting, clay throwing, pottery. Like they had a full art department, but they had a full automotive mechanic shop and a full auto body shop. And then they had an actual machine shop and they had a computer programming department and they had, I think they had a robotics station, but then they had all of their sciences and they had all the literature and they had, so it was you could come out of that school as a completely well-rounded individual and you didn't come away from school. I went through the more academic track, right? And graduated, my last year, I did like 6 AP classes my senior year. It was stupid, crazy.
Yeah. I had 5. Yeah. So.
Yeah. You get it. Right. But you didn't come away thinking that you were so far away and so much better than those kids that had to go over to that B grade school because they just want to do blue collar trade stuff. Oh,
right.
Go over to trade tech because you can't make it here. And I think we've kind of lost that, right? Like we've in our quest to make sure that our kids have all of the latest and greatest science and mathematics, we've lost what makes us human.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of that is the ability to appreciate beauty. Part of that is the ability to think clearly and reason through what's good and what's true. And that's at the heart of a lot of our debate, right? Is we don't want to admit that there are some things that are true, some things that are good. We don't want to limit anybody else's behaviors or freedoms because we don't want to do the intellectual work to get there, right? But when it gets to some of the basic cases like murder, like we all agree that there is something called murder and that we shouldn't be doing it, right? And that when someone does it, that it's bad.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so we do innately have this sense that we can judge actions. We can judge actions. We can discern good actions versus bad actions. Morally upstanding versus detrimental and evil. But we've gotten away from teaching that sort of thing in school and teaching
Agreed.
those things that make us human. And I think that's part of the answer to the AI conundrum is we need to reinvest in the things that make us uniquely human.
Yeah.
And be proud of them and celebrate them rather than celebrating solely, those intellectual parts which can easily and are being replaced, by different forms of AI.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. To the fact that my son when he graduated high school, we did not push him to immediately go into college, because to go into college and not know what it is you want to do before you start, I think is a mistake. You're setting yourself up for failure.
Uh-huh.
When I went to college, I did applied mathematics and communications, mass broadcast communications. And then I wound up working in radio. And now I work in IT for a software company that does insurance software for property and casualty. Because I figured, if the day ever came that we had universal health care in the United States, at least property and casualty is probably still secure. We're always going to have that.
Yeah, sure.
But
good call.
But we didn't push him to go to college because he didn't know what it was he wanted to do. So, over the course of about a year, introduced him to different things and ideas. He became very attached to the idea of becoming a welder. And now he's in trade school to become a welder. And he's absolutely loving it. The fact that he had that opportunity to be able to decide what it was he wanted to do was, I think, more valuable than what some people would say. Well, you didn't get the college experience. Yeah, the college experience has ruined a lot of people. I know people that are running for political office right now that are scared to death of the stories that are going to get out about what they did in college. So,
they remember those.
I'm just gonna say, I think their victims might remember them. That's not to charge anybody with a crime, but it's
that's fair. It's
yeah.
Well, and I think the value proposition has radically changed now.
Sure.
With colleges,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like, 20, 30, 40 years ago, the value proposition was very strong. But when you have at most institutions, the cost of the education has doubled year over year over year, the rate of inflation, sometimes even more, to where, most of the degrees that I talked, well, I won't say that. Let me rephrase. I have a friend who went to Dartmouth and graduated, I want to say late 70s, early 80s from Dartmouth. So premier institution, Ivy League school. Of his graduating class, 85% of the kids had a job at graduation. So the market valued what they were getting. His son graduated from Dartmouth last year. 35% of the kids had jobs at graduation. And yet the cost of that education is exponentially higher today than what it was 40 years ago when my friend went through there.
Yeah.
And yet the market value of it is dramatically lower. Right. And I think, and I don't know that, I've talked to the president of the University of Utah. I've talked to the president of the Utah Valley University. They have kind of different takes on how they're handling it. Both are public schools in Utah, which again, I'm Idaho, so should probably reference Idaho ones, but those are the ones I had the opportunity to speak with about the issue. And, University of Utah is definitely a premier research institute, and they pride themselves on that, and they put a premium on that. But they've also been very strong on going, hey, look, we're not falling into the trap of wokeness and ideological indoctrination for the people going here. And that's allowed their enrollment numbers to stay very strong in their community. Utah Valley University has said, hey, look, we're very focused on providing value and providing skills and training that will get our graduates jobs in the market when they graduate. And so, their value proposition is very strong, right? Like the kids that go there, they're not going deeply in debt, if in debt at all, because the tuition rates are still very low. And they do a really good job of teaching programs that are in demand in the market so that their students actually graduate with something that they can get a job with. And I think, again, I go back to we need to embrace what it is that makes us most human. And I get a little leery of saying, hey, our colleges should be teaching people to take a job. But somewhere we have to, not abandon or not lose those things that make us human. One of my sons is actually going to a very small Catholic liberal arts college. It's a very traditional liberal arts college. And when I say that, it's, traditional Latin Mass community, very, very orthodox in its teachings, very much embracing not just current events, but, the whole holistic body of Catholic teachings over the whole history of the Catholic Church. But he's going there to get a liberal arts education with the goal of becoming a school teacher.
Okay.
Right. And I'm going, okay, like probably I'm proud of him for it, right? Like it's not ever going to make him rich, but by golly, like if he comes out with what I think he will, he'll have a very, very solid understanding of what it is to be human and to be fully human and to be able to shape the next generation, the next two generations of young men and women, uh, in a way that we're sorely needing.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like he's got a pretty terrific background as far as where he's come from with you and your family.
His mom's fault. She's amazing.
Well, Denny, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I'm sure we both have different, paths for the evening, but
Yeah.
I will say this, that if it was up to me, you would absolutely be the person that I would want to sit across from the aisle from in the Senate or in a committee, because I feel like, and I can say that about a lot of the Republicans that I know that are currently in office, that I can have conversations with them about issues and be able to express myself and understand that there's a sense of respect coming from across the aisle. And I feel like that you would be that role. And so I think that, I'm not going to give you an endorsement only because I don't live in Idaho, and most of my endorsements don't work out. So if you'd like, I
get that. I think your listeners would appreciate this, that my personal, one of my favorite political books is actually Profiles in Courage by John F. Kennedy. And I look at it and I go, here's somebody who it should not matter what party you are, because I get flack because, he's a Democrat. But I look at it and I go, here's a man who said, I am going to collect profiles of people who acted courageously in the job that I am doing today so that I can model my service after these courageous humans. And I look at our current Senate and I go, man, wouldn't it be great if we could say, yeah, this body is full of courageous figures, people who are really willing to put their whole career on the line to do what's right for America. And that's my aspiration, right? If I am elected, that's my aspiration, is to really be able to courageously stand for what's right for America.
Yeah. Well, Denny, I will say I want to wish you luck, though, in the May 19th Republican primary. No chance that they're going to try and shift that to another date with all of the with the Supreme Court's decision. There's still talk of it potentially here and happening in South Carolina.
No, there's none of that going on down here. I mean, it's, again, the state, we got 2 districts in the state at a federal level, and the Senate race is a statewide race anyways. So I will say, the gerrymandering that I'm seeing, proposed maps and things like that, man, that actually breaks my heart.
It's scary.
And I don't care what side it's on. The way they're trying to manipulate it and to turn it topsy-turvy to gain a small edge now, like that's disastrous for our country.
Never in favor of gerrymandering, but also am not in favor of redistricting just based on a whim, and not based on the actual census data that comes out every 10 years.
No, I agree with that. And it's but have you seen the maps where like every district ties back into whatever major city they're trying to tie back into? I mean, I'm going, like, that's not right.
Virginia's going to wind up having Virginia normally had, and again, I get it benefits the Democrats, but Virginia normally would have a fairly distributed, rural section, mostly Republican, and then, over on the east side, mostly blue. And yet they have managed to figure out how to draw lines that will basically eliminate the red districts. But here in South Carolina and in Mississippi, they have figured out how to draw lines specifically to cut as much of the Republican representation into a district that is primarily black and primarily votes Democratic, to almost completely wipe out any potential Democratic or progressive liberal representation for Mississippi. South Carolina, if Clyburn were to pass away or retire, I guarantee you that our legislature would be called into session to try and figure out how to eliminate that district from the Democratic pocket.
Yeah,
and it would happen.
Any we've seen this over and over in America. When we try to disenfranchise a group, that group fights back.
Yeah,
and it's never pretty, and it's not. And I understand, right? I do. Like, we see that here in Idaho, where it's predominantly Republican. So people who would typically be Democrats, they become a different breed of Republican.
Yeah.
Right?
A little bit stiffer. Yeah.
And then you get, this internecine conflict, and it's one of those where, call it a fiduciary if you want. One of my mentors would call it a client relationship, like where, people are under the care and protection of whoever they're a client of. Right. And so as those who govern, like, the people underneath you are in your care. Like, you have a duty to protect all of them.
Every one of them.
Not just the ones in your party. All of them. And I mean, that's part of the reason why, like, I haven't drawn lines as far as like where I'm going to go and where I'm not. I'm going to go talk to people all over the place, because if I'm going to represent the state, then I'm going to represent the state. And, when I see the types of lines we draw, anyways, I know you got to go.
No. I
get it. But I just, man, it hurts my heart a little bit to see those lines drawn like that, where it's not
absolutely
protecting the people. It's not about caring for the people. It's about protecting party power. And
yeah.
And granted, I don't want to see the country go to where, again, there's a lot going on. I'm not in favor of a lot of the transgender agenda and the sex reassignment stuff. And I know it's a more complicated topic than just, 2-second gloss, but
sure.
But at the same time, like, there's people that have those beliefs, that have other beliefs that are actually worth listening to, worth talking about. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to feel disenfranchised over that one issue.
I have friends that are transgender that would absolutely support the idea that there is no reason to manipulate a child into a different gender, but also recognize that there still should be some level of mental health care for a child or teenager that feels like they might not be in the right body, that may feel like, and then, if when they are of age that they can make that decision for themselves, then they do. But it's for even for those that are transgender that either have children or no children, or know of families that have children, because it's a community that supports each other. But they would say that it's been created into a boogeyman for a lot of people on the right, that there isn't, they talk about NCAA, and I think Trump talks about it pretty frequently, about how, there's all these male athletes in female sports. And the NCAA has the statistics to say there's 500,000 athletes in the NCAA. There's 11 trans athletes, and they're not competing at a level that is a threat to anyone. And I don't know. I'm not transgender. I don't know what a person going through that sort of state mentality is feeling for themselves. But I can't imagine anyone just changing genders just so that they can compete at a higher level or beat a bunch of other athletes like that. That it does. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. I'm just saying I can't imagine that scenario of doing something so permanent to yourself just so you can get a medal. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And I think, of the folks that I know, the vast majority of the concern has a lot more to do with what you're talking about, with the influencing children, right? It's the proverbial, the trope of, drag queen story hour. right, at the public library. It's like, okay, is that really beneficial to the kids? Is that really actually, or are we trying to push them to it? And then we see a lot of the school districts going, no, we're going to teach this to the kids. And if your kids want to change, we're not going to tell you, your parents, right? Because again, at the end of the day, we have to, I believe this is what our church teaches, right? Is that the education of my children is my responsibility. Now, I might use a school to help, but it's my responsibility to bring them up in a way that's consistent with our faith and our belief system. To have another organization that I think is helping with that education override what I'm trying to teach my children, that's a problem, right? And to circumvent my authority as a parent, that's a problem, right? And I think that's where we're having a lot of the conflict, is where it's being pushed and inserted into the conversation. And again, there's a lot of things in America that we can do that I think we'd agree are not morally correct, but they're legal.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think the question then becomes, why should we allow that to be pushed onto our kids when we don't believe it's appropriate as parents?
Sure.
Why would the school have the right to teach that and push that onto kids? And I don't think they do have that right.
Yeah, no, and I think what we see here in South Carolina is that, and I can't speak to Idaho, but what we see in South Carolina is like drag queen story hour. It's not taking place at it's not taking place at a public school. No parent is being forced to have their child in that particular event or whatever. And I'll also say this: I have a friend who's a drag queen who reads Macbeth in the most eloquent way I've ever heard in my entire life. So, but I've not taken my children to any drag story readings, only because I don't even know where they happen. I think that in some situations it always feels like, from the perspective of a progressive, that these things that we're hearing about that the right is afraid of or thinks shouldn't be happening, from the progressive side, we look at it and go, it's not really happening. It's not quite as big a deal as OAN or Fox News is making it out to be. It's not that big a deal. And then the left picks up on that, and the left-wing media is like, this is what the right's upset about. And it's like, and it just creates this firestorm of us as citizens. We look at it and we're like, what the hell is going on? Like I don't see it. Why are they trying to force me to see it? And then it becomes,
it's an outrage economy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's outrage economy. And again, it's very unproductive, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think you recall, I don't know if you recall this or not. Do you recall the first Gulf War?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was in Boy Scouts. I remember they brought in a TV and hooked it up to the cable that was coming into the church where our Boy Scout meeting was at. So CNN was on, and all you saw was brownish, dark colored screens and occasionally a flash or some tracer rounds. Yeah. Like that was all you saw. Yeah. That was the reporting.
But it was around the clock, right? That was like one of the first times that I remember a conflict going on the news updates about what was happening in this conflict around the clock, and it's only intensified, and then the social media battles and the social media, 24/7, everybody saying something, and it's again, the trolls are alive and well on both sides of the spectrum, and it's very unhealthy for the civic dialogue and for communities. So,
well, Denny, I absolutely appreciate the time you give me tonight, and I will say this: I think Idaho would be a better place with you as the Republican nominee. So I will absolutely wish you luck, and again, not endorse you just because I would fear what that would bring. But I think that you would be an outstanding representative as the Republican nominee for the state of Idaho. So May 19th is the primary date. Early voting started already?
Yep, early voting's ongoing. So getting reports of people voting for me from some of the events I've been at. So that's positive. And yeah.
Your crew, I assume, is probably watching to see what the turnout is even for early voting. Are they reporting those numbers back to you?
No, not yet.
No? Oh, goodness. Get on them.
I don't even know if we report on early voting numbers here. Or
as a campaign manager, I would call the precincts, or I would call the county office every single day to find out what the early voting was for the day before. And as soon as they could get that information, it didn't do us any good. We lost that election, but I was intense about it. I'm a numbers guy. That was what I wanted to know. How many people showed up for early voting for this precinct, 2 years ago? It's important.
Yeah, we did look at some of that date, and we did target some of our messaging, especially to people who were, absentee voters and early voters.
That's great.
So,
that's great.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Well, Denny,
thanks
I appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure to check out, you can go to dennyforsenate.com. You can check out his website, check out his platform. Also, you can check out his book. It's on Amazon. There is a link in the show notes. The name of the book is, of course, hold on. I've got it right in front of me. Blue Collar Blessed, A Humble Life in Idaho. Denny, again, thank you for being a guest on the podcast this week. I really appreciate your time.
Okay.
That is going to do it for this episode number 306. Links to all of our past episodes, podcast platforms, merchandise, social media are available on our webpage, theallaboutnothing.com. And if you think our financial model of giving away free content and entertainment is silly and you're in the giving mood, why not become an official Nothinger and support the show? Members get early access to this episode as well as exclusive content. Visit members.theallaboutnothing.com or find a link in the webpage. You can also give a one-time donation through the same link. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can call and leave us a message, 803-672-0533. You can email the show at theallaboutnothing.com, or you can join our Discord server, links found on our webpage. Thank you for listening, everyone. You all stay safe, be kind, and Denny, this is where I need you to say, keep your hands to yourself.
Yeah, keep your hands to yourself.
The All About Nothing podcast is a product of Big Media and produced and engineered by me, Barrett Gruber. Thanks to Cake for our intro music, Sick of You. You can follow everything Cake the band at cakemusic.com. Thanks to Muff the producer for our outro music. You can follow Muff on Instagram at Muff the producer. You can follow me across social media by visiting Linktree/Barrett Gruber. And you can follow Zach King on Linktree/AANZach. Want to support the show? Visit our webpage, theallaboutnothing.com, and become a member. There are several tiers available that give you early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. To find links to our social media, podcast platforms, and merchandise to support the show, as well as past episodes, visit theallaboutnothing.com. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can email the show at theallaboutnothing.com, or you can call our number and leave a message. Dial 803-672-0533. If the time between these episodes is more than you can handle, check out our sister shows. What the Pod Was That with Carrie, Zach, and myself. Welcome to Wonderland with Ami. Politically Speaking with Erica, Kirsten, and Emily. And Black, White, and Blue in the South with Dr. Jameel Brooks and Bill Kimmler. Please subscribe and share this show. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe and punch that notification bell. Thank you for listening, and hear us next week. The preceding podcast is solely owned by the host or hosts and is distributed by Big Media, LLC. Copyright 2026.